It's 4:20-ish somewhere, and right now that somewhere is right here. So hello and welcome to the Cannabis Show. I'm producer Vince, and here's your host, Ricardo Baca.
Vince, dude, thank you for that. And to everybody watching and listening today, welcome to the Cannabist Show, where we talk about all things weed.
All things.
And that is the serious marijuana news and the not so serious stuff as well. In fact, if you pop onto the site right now, that is thecannabist.co. You will see stories about the normalization of marijuana on Colorado's 2-year anniversary of legal recreational sales.
It helped around the holiday table.
About pre-rolled mini joints rolled in 24-karat gold rolling papers.
Leafs by Snoop really missed that ball.
And about how school officials in Colorado still don't know if more kids are bringing marijuana to school as 2016 approaches.
That one's just a good read.
Of course, producer Vince is here in the studio with me. And dude, how have you been?
I have been great, Ricardo. Thank you for asking. I spent my weekend last week at the Broncos game shooting mutton busting. It was mutton busting and Broncos football, the most Colorado thing I could ever imagine. How are you doing? A mile high, 1,000 feet in the air on your new billboard, Ricardo.
Oh, man. Yeah, of course you were going to bring that up, Vince.
Couldn't
and
help it.
If our viewers and if you're listening to the podcast, go check out the Cannabist on Instagram to see me on a billboard. It's disturbing and hilarious. Vince, what's our Instagram handle?
You guys can follow us on Instagram at CannabistCO.
It's totally bizarre. And Vince, it is that time. I hope you're ready for it, because it is the Week in Weed.
I'm so ready for this Week in Weed, Ricardo.
All right, good. Because we are starting this Week in Weed in Colorado, where a man suspected of robbing a marijuana shop in the middle of the night was caught, not by police, but by a TV cameraman.
And I love this story. I've reread it, I've rewatched it, I watched 7 News just to see it because, come on, the news beginning to become the news. It doesn't happen often enough.
So 7 News photojournalist right here in Denver, his name is Daryl Orr, whose nickname is Road Wrangler because of his trademark cowboy hat, which is awesome.
Yeah.
He was working a graveyard shift a few days before Christmas when a call came across the scanner about a break-in at a Denver pot shop. So Orr, he immediately headed over to where Denver police were searching for the suspects with canines, and he dodged some police roadblocks. He set up his gear just north of the pot shop, and when Orr noticed a man precariously hiding under a nearby bush, he turned on his TV van's brights and yelled at the man to, "Hey, stay on the ground!"
And he wasn't done yelling yet. The photog then yelled to the police, "He's under the bush! He's right here!"
And amazingly, it worked. Police later shared with Orr that voice commands are the most important part of getting criminals to obey orders. Vince, I mean, you're a photojournalist. Can you imagine reporting on burglary in the middle of the night and running into one of the suspects before police?
Ricardo, of course I can imagine it. It's the dream come true. No, not really. But the important part is, are you going to do the Jake Gyllenhaal Nightcrawler scumbag thing, or, like Orr decided, be the hero?
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. So elsewhere in the Week in Weed, Vince, comes big news from the DEA on cannabis research. And effective immediately, it is now easier to study marijuana's best-known non-psychoactive compound, CBD, or cannabidiol, after the Drug Enforcement Administration this week announced a small regulatory change.
Now, Ricardo, CBD first gained widespread attention in Colorado after hundreds of families moved to the state hoping that CBD would cure their sick children, many of whom suffered from seizure disorders.
Right, and this change affects researchers who have already received approval from the DEA and the Food and Drug Administration to study CBD. In fact, it ultimately allows those researchers, there are 76 of them, to apply for a waiver that would let them expand their research without additional approval.
And this comes just 6 months after the Obama administration made cannabis research a little bit easier, right?
You know, true. The president and his administration eliminated a long-standing bureaucratic obstacle to privately funded medical marijuana research in June when he eliminated the review from the Public Health Service Board, and that the federal government at the time called it redundant. It's a very fascinating time to be paying attention to cannabis research. research, and still, right now, marijuana is more difficult to research than heroin or cocaine.
That, of course, is because it's still listed as a Schedule I narcotic under federal law, which won't be changed until a couple more court appearances happen. If any of you out there, however, are interested in learning more about the CBD migration to Colorado, the Denver Post and DPTV did a great mini-doc series called Desperate Journey last year, which was nominated for a Pulitzer by our photojournalist Mihaela Gaylord and writer John Ingold.
Definitely worth checking out. You know, you can search for Desperate Journey right at the Cannabist. Check out that search bar at the top right, type in Desperate Journey. It'll pop up. It's a pretty amazing story and a very compelling video and photos that come along with it. Now, let's get on to my first guest this week. And she's making her second appearance on the show. She is the executive director of DC-based Students for Sensible Drug Policy. And I'm particularly psyched to welcome Betty Aldworth to the Cannabist Show. Betty, how's it going?
Hey, Ricardo.
Thanks so much for joining us.
I love coming on the show, so thanks for the invitation.
You're back in Denver, hey.
Yeah, I got to come back home and hang out with the kiddies for a couple of weeks, so before we head off for New Hampshire and some presidential election shenanigans.
Oh, man. I'm sure it'll be a party and very busy.
Yes.
But speaking of a party, I saw the selfie, Betty, and you were recently hanging out with Congressman Cory Booker earlier this month, and you said on Twitter that you two talked about, quote, a more sensible future, which is so key to involve, you know, that word from your organization in there. So I'm curious if you guys talked about cannabis law reform specifically in your time with Cory.
Yes, in fact, a good chunk of the time at that particular reception was devoted to cannabis law reform specifically. It was organized by my good friend Dylan Schwartz, and he was able to bring a number of different cannabis entrepreneurs and advocates into a room together to speak with the congressman about the most important priorities. And one of the great things about Congressman Booker is that he really understands very well the intersection between cannabis business and justice. And, you know, he understands the negative impacts of the drug war, the ways that marijuana laws, you know, burden poor communities and communities of color with, you know, all of the terrible criminal justice implications of marijuana prohibition. And he gets that nexus better than most elected officials, I think.
And he's been very active in pushing bills forward. You know, wouldn't you say he's one of the more active congressmen on the issue? As
one of the co-sponsors of the CARES Act, excuse me, Senator Booker, as one of the sponsors of the CARES Act in the Senate, he has written one of the most comprehensive pieces of legislation that would move cannabis policy forward. And I think that during the course of our conversation, we were able to elucidate for him some of the other issues that come along with cannabis's the Schedule I status of cannabis and the various you know, nuanced problems that it causes. For example, you know, in most states, medical marijuana patients who receive a legitimate license can't receive a transplant, an organ transplant, if they need it, if they test positive for cannabis, even if they're allowed to use it. And we had an extensive conversation about scheduling.
Sure.
The CARES Act calls for rescheduling to 2. And we talked a great deal about what descheduling would look like and why that's important. And then, of course, banking.
Of course, and we're going to talk some more about banking today. But you know, this is a constant conversation in the legalization realm. Rescheduling versus descheduling. Do you get the impression, especially given that you spend so much time in D.C., that it's going to have to be baby steps and maybe rescheduling? Or do you think that descheduling is even a realistic option?
Wow, I like to be an optimist, and I think that there's certainly, well, I'll say this. I think that addressing the scheduling of cannabis is less likely to happen, or is unlikely to happen before there is some sort of comprehensive legislation at the federal level to allow states to treat cannabis as they would like. So I think that addressing the schedule will probably come after. Something like, you know, Jared Polis's bills might get through.
Sure. Okay. Interesting. Well, Betty, obviously you front an organization, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, so I wanted to talk about some things that involve students, children, teenagers. So a big federal report released last week shows that teen cannabis use, I know you're familiar with this report, teen cannabis use held steady in 2014. The reason why this is big news, and we've talked about it on the program, I believe last week or the week before, is that legal sales started in 2014 in 2 of the states. And in both of those states, the trends held steady and didn't move to a statistically significant level. So I want to know from you, what does that say that adolescent marijuana use didn't change in 48 American states, and in 2 or 3 others, it actually declined in this first year of sales?
Well, I think that it's really incredible that we're starting to see some of these things that we've been talking about for years, right? We know pretty well that teen use of marijuana is not correlated to concerns about long-term effects, because teenagers don't think about long-term effects when they're deciding whether or not to use a substance.
Right.
We know that making marijuana legal for adults is not going to encourage more young people to use it in the long term. Although, you know, I'm not particularly surprised by a very small, but what will ultimately be, I think, a temporary bump in Colorado, and I'm not surprised that it's statistically insignificant.
Right, right.
But you know, one of the things that that is very interesting about this entire conversation around teen use is that, and your colleague John Ingold wrote a piece just a couple days ago about this, which is that there is so much we don't know. The data that we had prior to 2012 was inadequate, and the data that we've had from 2012 to 2014 was inadequate. And so now in 2015, we're starting to see some baseline information about the real impacts of marijuana legalization in Colorado. And in a handful of years, we'll be able to make some more concrete predictions. But when you have folks like Tom Gorman and the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Task Force, you know, screaming that the sky is falling, it's really difficult to believe when you look at the actual evidence that we're seeing and hear stories from your friends. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what things look like in a handful of years, and to seeing what school data looks like now that they're pulling out marijuana-related offenses versus all drug offenses.
I know, and the data collection on this was extremely incomplete, and I think we're finding that a lot of these government entities and the public schools weren't quite prepared for this. The Colorado State Patrol, you know, could have been separating marijuana DUIs from alcohol DUIs before they were, but since they weren't, it's taking us until now to kind of separate the data and really dig in. But I think these numbers were interesting, because here we are. Right. Colorado had a full year of sales in 2014, and if these numbers aren't showing a statistical increase at this moment, it'll be interesting to see what 2015 says.
Yeah, I don't think that we'll see much more increase.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing them, whatever they are. But along the same lines, a recent Denver Post report showed that school officials in Colorado still don't know if kids are using marijuana or bringing it to school more than they were pre-legalization. Some educators are saying, they told us, that not much has changed since legalization. So, Betty, are you surprised or no?
Well, do you remember like a year ago when prohibitionists were saying, oh, there's so much more marijuana in schools, there's this huge increase in drug-related offenses in schools.
Right.
But there was no indication that that was specifically about marijuana. I'm thrilled to see that we're starting to get some more and better information. I am not surprised that nothing has changed in schools. I mean, you know, we can expect to see at some point the benefits of legalization and a regulated market. I think, I anticipate that we'll see an eventual decline in teen marijuana use, but we are seeing declines in use of all other substances after a period of years, especially with illicit pharmaceuticals, where we've seen massive increases, and finally those things are starting to level out. So I think that we're starting to get it a little bit right when it comes to public education and how we talk to teens about substance use, no matter what the substance is. And all of this kind of points to the fact that, we might not be able to say definitively that tourism is up, or the business climate is better, or the environmental impacts of illicit cultivation in Colorado are eliminated, or the tax revenue is really doing great things. All of the arguments that go along with legalization. We're still waiting on a lot of that evidence. But what we can say definitively is that the predictions of the prohibitionists have proven false.
Right, and that's a good point. And going back to John Ingold's story that he wrote for the front page of the Sunday Denver Post this week, some of the more cautious observers of this are saying, let's give this 9-10 more years before we try and say anything about what legalization can do to a community. So, Betty, thank you for joining us. We're going to talk some more here very shortly. Now, before we introduce our next guest, I'm going to throw to our very own captain of cannabis, Professor Pat, for this week's entry in the new Cannabist lexicon.
Bowl, also a unit of measurement, i.e. spot me two bowls. A bowl is the part of the pipe or bong where you put the weed. Quote, quick, hit the bowl, it's cherried.
All right, thanks for that, Professor Pat. Amazing. On to our next guest, who is also an executive director of an important national organization working on drug policy. It's my pleasure to welcome the National Cannabis Industry Association's Aaron Smith to the Cannabist Show. How's it going, man?
All right, thanks for having me here. It's fantastic.
Yeah, your first time on the show, huh?
Yeah, who would have thought, world-renowned cannabis editor here at the Denver Post. It's great to be here.
Well, we've had your colleague Taylor, and I have to tell a funny story because you two used to work together. You used to be Aaron's deputy at the NCIA, is that right?
Yep.
Crazy.
In the breakthrough year at NCIA. So.
Well, Aaron, thank you for coming on. I wanted to start by asking you, because this is very timely, a federal judge in Denver this week heard arguments from the credit union that hopes to serve the marijuana industry, as well as the Federal Reserve Bank that is refusing to approve it. And the judge's decision will be an important next step for the future of pot banking. But what do you think is going to happen next on this front?
Well, I think that it's clear that the banking issue, of all of the myriad of issues that we work on as an industry association and as a movement, the banking issue is the one that there's really a consensus that this needs to be fixed because it's a public safety crisis. We have business owners and employees taking duffel bags of cash into the IRS offices and the state regulators to pay their licensing fees. And I really commend Fourth Corner for continuing to push this to try to bring banking access to businesses in Colorado. But whatever happens in this case, it's imperative that Congress move to change the banking regulations so that there is access, equal access to banking across the country, not just with this one bank in Colorado, but in California, which has an even larger potential marijuana market, and the 23 other states with some form of marijuana legalization.
Aaron, tell me this. I mean, here we are approaching the 2nd anniversary of legal sales in Colorado. Are you surprised that no banking resolution has been figured out in the last 2 years? Or are you not surprised because this is the speed at which we have to move?
Yeah, I can't say I'm surprised. I'm disappointed. But, in a lot of this, what's interesting is that Congress isn't known for being very functional, especially these days, at getting anything done, whether it be a marijuana issue or something else. And a lot of what stands in the way between some sensible progress on banking and where we're at today is just that. It's not even that it's a third world issue anymore. We have seen appropriations amendments dealing with banking on both the House and the Senate that have passed over the last 2 years. But the process is making it very difficult for any reform on any front to get through Congress. And so we need to keep pushing it. And I am hopeful that 2016 will be the watershed year when we have at least 5 states, I think, moving toward retail marijuana sales, including California, which is larger than the markets and all of the others combined.
Right, and we're definitely going to talk about 2016 predictions here shortly. But first, Aaron, you guys just announced, the NCIA just announced its lobby days in Washington, D.C. I've heard stories. This year it's happening May 12th through 13th, 2016. I'm curious what these days are like, because, you know, here it is, a bunch of marijuana industry merrymakers taking on Capitol Hill, and also has any real change come because of lobby days, or, you know, what kind of progress has been a result of this event?
Yeah, it's a great experience for our members to participate in, as well as staffers on the Hill. And we've been doing Lobby Day since 2011. Started off with 4 or 5 business owners coming out to DC, and last year or earlier this year we had over 100.
Nice.
And so it's important to remember that the most Capitol Hill staffers and certainly members of Congress still haven't actually had an experience face-to-face with a cannabis business professional. And we are there every day talking about the public safety crisis around banking and these sort of things. But it's really important that they get the opportunity to hear personal stories. And I have seen a real movement over the last few years where it used to be really hard for us to even get the meetings. Now they're calling us to get the meetings, and they're taking us much more seriously. And you say cannabis merrymakers, but really it's mostly folks in suits and ties and look like anybody else, and that's what's really important for members of Congress, especially in states that don't have an industry, to be able to see that we are just another American business sector trying to be treated as such.
That makes sense, and I've certainly seen comments on this show saying, "Wow, you had 2 pot shop owners last week. We had Wanda James from Simply Pure, and we had Andy Williams from Medicine Man." And you hear comments regularly about, "Oh, he looks like he owns a bank or runs a Subway," or whatever it might be. That just normal folk, and I imagine, especially senators and congressmen and women in DC, that can have an impact just being face to face with some of these business owners who look like everybody else.
It does. I mean, I think it's really made a difference here in Colorado, where at this point probably everybody here in this state has some experience with the industry and sees it as just another part of the local economy. But the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee looking at the banking issue is from Texas, and unfortunately doesn't have that real person-to-person experience, and that's what the lobby days are about.
Cool. All right, well, let's look ahead. I want to look ahead to the 2016 presidential election with you, Aaron. What candidates are presenting or backing the most marijuana-friendly and unfriendly legislation and perspectives from your point of view? Who are you rooting for in this race, especially given what you do for a living?
Well, clearly the 2 that stand out are Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Rand Paul. On the
I have a Democrat and a Republican. Very interesting. Yeah.
And many of the candidates aren't actually serving in the Senate as they are, so they don't have an opportunity right now to be carrying legislation. But both of them are carrying comprehensive marijuana reform legislation in the Senate, and while aren't the front runners, I think are helping to shape the dialogue around the debate to make sure that this issue is front and center, whether it be a states' rights issue that Senator Paul might be talking about, or a social justice issue, as Senator Sanders has done such a great job at helping to shape as we move forward into the general election.
And I know we've spoke on the show before with your colleague Taylor West about you guys hosting Rand Paul at one of your last Denver events. Have you done? Has the NCIA communicated any with Mr. Sanders? And I'm not aware, so I just wanted to throw that out there and see.
Yeah, we've done some outreach, and I think maybe we could see something in the months ahead. Trying not to portray ourselves as big business, because we know that he doesn't want to be in bed with the industry. But
right.
It's really notable though that even those are the 2 that really shine. But most of the candidates, even on the Republican circus, most of them support some form of states' rights around the issue. And you hear a lot about laboratories of democracy and allowing Colorado and the other 3 states to move forward with their laws, even while stopping short of supporting federal reform right now. And I think that's great. Just 4 years ago, it was hard to have this issue even discussed.
Oh yeah,
and,
sure.
The ones who are coming out and saying they're going to shut, the Chris Christie shut down state laws, those are outliers who nobody's listening to anyway, to be honest.
Yeah, he's certainly not leading any polls right now, is he? I want to bring Betty back into the conversation because now I'd like us to expand our view on 2016. Obviously, the election's coming up, and that could very well give this new legal industry a new direction. More guidance, less guidance, we'll see. But what else are you guys thinking will be the big stories in cannabis in 2016? Betty, let's start with you.
Sure. So we have marijuana legalization on the ballot in at least 5 states, medical use in at least 2. And of course, SSDPers will be out turning out the youth vote for those initiatives and working on ensuring that the conversation continues after the elections themselves. That's going to be a big deal. It's going to change. Certainly, as Aaron mentioned, with California, if California comes on board and these 4 other states where we will be likely to vote on adult use marijuana, it's going to be just a complete and utter game changer as far as the conversation is concerned. We can't continue to have these enormous markets without the federal government doing something to address the question of legal marijuana, and certainly medical. We'll see more states come on board with limited medical use programs. Florida and perhaps Missouri will be voting on medical use. And
Florida giving it another try.
Yeah,
huh?
Absolutely. And I think that we are working with the campaign there, where we are in conversations with them. I have a very hopeful outlook on what's going to happen in Florida, and I think that 58% in a non-presidential election, they need to reach 60% this year. I think it's going to happen. I'm very hopeful about Florida.
And both of you have mentioned California. I think it's worth noting again, when you're talking about one American state having the 8th largest economy in the world, I mean, it really helps to put California in that kind of perspective, right? Because we're not talking about your average state. We're talking about one of the world's largest grossing governments. So, I mean, if California does go rec in November of 2016, that's a huge deal.
Absolutely.
Aaron, what are you looking forward to outside of the presidential election, outside of the potential states going rec, medical?
Yeah, well, there's an interplay with what the work we're doing on the Hill. Right now there are about 20 members of Congress who represent states that have retail marijuana industries. If the 5 states that we're talking about being on the ballot and Vermont all pass in 2016, we'll be up over 100. And and as we talked about how a lot of this, members of Congress really don't care about something until it's in their backyard and it affects their constituencies. Well, that's a huge jump in 1 year. California has 53 congressional representatives in the House.
So it's 5 times what it is now, potentially, is what you're saying.
Right.
Okay, crazy.
And I think that it's ours to lose, but it's really important that the industry invest in the passage of these laws, because it will not, and that includes supporting the work of SSDP and MPP that are working on the ground to get these laws passed, because especially in a state like California, it's an enormous cost in the media markets there, and there will be opposition, some moneyed opposition in probably almost all of those states. And this isn't just happening in a vacuum on its own. It's happening because of decades of work and millions of dollars that have been invested to get us to where we are, and it will take that much more going forward.
It's interesting because we had Troy Dayton from the ArcView group on our live show 2 weeks ago, and that's one of the things that he said about 2016 too. He encouraged marijuana entrepreneurs, including the 150, 160 people we had in attendance at our Cannabist Awards live show a few weeks ago, to donate. And he just said that ultimately the shape of these campaigns, the future of these campaigns in other states is in these people's hands in many regards, because they live in a legal state, they're operating in a legal state. Does that resonate true to you, Betty?
We could spend an entire Cannabist show talking about the ways that marijuana policy reform is being funded, and how traditional funders of drug policy reform are much more interested in edgier issues, right? They perceive marijuana policy reform as something that should be funded by what is now the industry. But I can't let us move on from 2016 without noting that there are a couple of other really big things that are going to impact the way that the global dialogue is shaped.
Let's hear it.
We're going to see more countries come on board with medical marijuana, including certainly Colombia, which just announced.
Right.
We can expect to see some movement in Ireland and a large number of other countries, Jamaica as well. Mexico is about to have a conversation in the legislature about legal adult use marijuana, which is going to change everything about the way that we talk about cross-border issues. And there are even people, respectable people in Mexico, talking about importing marijuana for medical use.
And if you told us, you know, in 1995 that
Right.
Colombia was going to do it and Mexico is going to think about doing it just 15 years later, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Right. You never would have thought. And of course, we have Canada, where they are exploring very seriously how to implement a legal adult use system. All of these global changes are going to come to a head at the United Nations General Assembly Special Session on the World Drug Problem in April.
Which you were attending,
Which
right?
of course, yes,
Okay.
we will be there. SSDP will be there in full force. We are likely to be submitting a variety of papers. We'll have a variety of events happening, including a large-scale demonstration outside the UN on April 18th, which I'm very excited about.
And this is in, what, Vienna, Austria?
This is actually in New York.
Oh, this is in New York,
We will also
okay.
be attending the Commission on Narcotic Drugs in Vienna and presenting some perspectives from global youth on drug policy reform, talking
interesting,
about
okay.
regional priorities, including elimination of the death penalty for drug-related offenses, medication-assisted treatment for people who are addicted to opioid drugs, safe injection facilities, and all of these other harm reduction issues that we talk about frequently at SSDP.
So you're saying if anybody's in New York and they're down for a pre-420 party, they can...
They should really come hang out with us outside the UN, where we're going to be doing some great art-related demonstrations. I'm very excited about it. I can't talk about it too much, although I really want to. So UNGAS is going to be a really big deal. And while treaty reform is unlikely to actually be initiated formally at UNGAS, we can expect that to start the process. And, you know, really we can't go on too much longer without talking about making major changes to the drug conventions, especially as more and more countries are moving forward with decriminalization, legalization of adult use, and other other treaty-related issues. And we need to really be talking about, you know, human rights, which is the most important job of the UN.
Mm-hmm.
And human rights are violated every single day in countries around the world, including the United States, through the enforcement of the war on drugs. That's the conversation we need to be having.
So much coming up.
Yeah,
all right.
it's going to be a big
You
year.
guys are the right people to ask that question to, so thank you for sharing. And of course, it's Betty's favorite time of the program.
Oh, no!
It is the pot quiz. As Betty knows, but now we can teach you, Aaron. If she gets the question wrong, the answer wrong, you can steal it, and vice versa. So that's how we roll. 4 questions total, quick and easy. Not always easy, but you can talk to producer Dane afterward if you have any gripes about the difficulty of this week's quiz.
As long as we have real low expectations for me on this one.
All right, Betty. What major sports organization is lessening the penalties it levies against its athletes for using marijuana, according to a recent Associated Press investigation?
It's the collegiate athletic something or another.
You are on to something, and producer Vince is giving you it.
That's pretty
Let's
good
call
for
it that.
sports related.
It is the NCAA.
NCAA.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's a
thank you.
big report out of the Associated Press this week, and sure enough, they are starting to treat marijuana as a less serious drug. So progress?
Progress, absolutely. Now we just need to get colleges to stop expelling and evicting students from dorms for marijuana-related offenses, and then we'll be golden.
I was watching the Bronco game last night, Monday Night Football, total nail-biter, but you know, every game you see Shane Ray performing, and just going back a few short months, the NFL draft, Shane Ray, before he was drafted #1 by the Broncos, was pulled over in Missouri, where he was attending school, and you know, certainly received received a major hand slap for being pulled over with marijuana in that state. So, Aaron, you're up next. And we'll be a little bit loose with you since we gave Betty the NCAA. You got that right. But Aaron, in a story written by former NFL defensive lineman Marvin Washington on theplayerstribune.com, he credits what cannabinoid as potentially being a, quote, helmet for the brain?
Another sports one. I would think, would that be CBD?
CBD. All right. You guys are killing it with the sports questions.
I know,
Okay.
it's amazing.
All right. Good work. Betty, we're back to you. And this is a music question. So Snoop Dogg was gifted 3 duffel bags of weed before a recent concert in Oregon. 3 duffel bags. So the gifts from legal marijuana businesses in the state were valued at how much money? A, $1,000. B, $3,000. C, $5,000. D, $7,000.
Okay, let's see. Hang on, some quick math.
You're like, let's see, 3 duffel bags. That's
I
on
know, I
average
know.
about 2 pounds per duffel.
Right, exactly. About 2 pounds per duffel bag. So that would be like wholesale? Are we talking wholesale prices?
And no, it was concentrates, it was edibles, it was flour.
I'm going to go with, what was
topicals.
D, 7,000?
D was $7,000.
Is this like, wait, don't tell me. Are you going to give me hints if I'm not quite there?
Well, yeah, we do love the quiz at Wait. In fact, this is modeled entirely after that.
I'm going to say D, $7,000.
All right, and that is a good guess, but you're wrong.
Okay.
Aaron, for the steal. A is 1,000, B is 3, C is 5.
3 duffel bags.
Right.
Well, I would have said 7, so I'll say 5.
Nice
I
for
got
the
the
steal. Aaron just jumps in there for the steal. Okay. And Aaron, here we are with you for the last question of the pop quiz. Bob Dylan hopes to win his 12th Grammy this year, but many years ago, he was one of the first people to introduce marijuana to what famous 1960s band?
Oh, wow. The Beatles.
Damn,
Wow.
pulling it.
Music
out.
I could do. Sports. That was
Hey, you guys fared pretty well. Good work. I want to say thanks to our guests, Betty Aldworth and Aaron Smith, and thank you to you all for watching and listening to the podcast. If you're listening right now, please tell your friends about us. We're so psyched to be doing this for you. So I am Ricardo Baca. I'm joined by producers Vince, Dane, and Professor Pat, which was awesome. Have a great day, everyone, and we will see you next week.
The win, I'm all in, I'm calling any posse you be raising at the end. I say
That
it
was
again,
awesome.
ain't afraid to get in. I be going for the jackpot with ace in my hand, I'm raw.